just want to first start out with this rice question. When you've been here in Japan and you see the government releasing their stockpiles, you get the sense that they wait and wait and wait until you just cannot do anything else, and finally they act. Do you get that sense this time around in this so-called rice crisis?
Well, certainly that's the case. But it's very interesting. Obviously, on a bigger scale, there's so many critical issues happening globally as well as in Japan. But as you know, rice is the number one headline in Japan because of the doubling of rice. And of course, rice is an important staple in the Japanese market. But as you know, it has become political. The Minister of Agriculture, Eto-san, had made a comment that, basically made light of the fact that rice prices have increased. And so he's had to resign. And then we have now a new Minister of Agriculture, Koizumi-san, who says he's now the rice minister, to try to address this delay in reacting to the doubling of the price of rice. And they did take action finally. And they took quite dramatic action by releasing the emergency stocks of rice, which has been, 2 or 3 year old rice, and bringing it directly to consumer, either through e-commerce or directly to the retailer. So they're now allowing the consumer to buy rice at half the price. But as you've seen in all the TV programs, you have these lines of people and staying maybe even overnight, and yet allotted one bag of 5 kilogram rice per person, which basically is a $14 discount after these long lines. And so it seems quite dramatic. But I think, to me, although the issue now is rice, it's really about the cost push inflation that has affected the consumer overall. And this is kind of like the camel that broke the straw that broke the camel's back, really, because it's more than just rice. We have been under cost push inflation, and that has brought all food up. Exactly. That's the key issue. And so this is kind of like, oh my gosh, now rice.
Right, exactly. I mean, I'm glad you mentioned that, because it's not just rice, it's other things as well. And sorry, I'm just going to continue on here. We're having a bit of a technical issue. But I was saying that it's not just rice, it's other, food products as well. And if you're in the food industry, you have your finger on the pulse on getting your hands on the best ingredients at the most affordable price. And I think this whole rice issue has brought to the fore what we've all suspected all along, that there are just so many middlemen involved in Japan before you get the farmer's rice to the consumer. I mean, is that your experience in Japan, and how has that changed over the years?
Well, of course, rice is basically domestically grown. And to your point, there is this whole distribution issue. But beyond that, we did have a couple things that have really exacerbated the issue. There was bad weather in a crop that caused a shortage of rice. And then government policies. For the longest time, they discouraged production of rice to maintain the pricing of rice to the farmers at a certain level. And that ended up backfiring now with a shortage of rice. And of course, there's been an increase in demand actually by the huge inbound tourism. So this kind of combination of issues has made this a problem on rice. As I mentioned earlier, the bigger issue is the cost push inflation that has affected the consumer overall. And this issue has to do with the weak yen. So as everyone knows, we've been in deflation for over 30 years, which has been tough. But just as it seemed like we're coming out of this deflationary environment, the yen has gotten very weak. And Japan imports 60% of its food. And of course, over 90% of its energy. All of this is affecting the consumer. And so the consumer has really been kind of beaten down, where the cost of living has come up and wages have not kept in step with it. And so then the rice issue, which is so important to the Japanese consumer, is, as I said, the last straw. And so that's what we're seeing. And so the issues of rice is not only a distribution thing. There is the weather issue. There was government policies. But again, the total issue is really a matter of the cost of living that's coming up.
Robin?
Ernie, thanks so much. This is Robin in Singapore. You mentioned all the key words: cost push inflation and general dissatisfaction with the cost of living. what do you think are the political ramifications in Japan with elections on the horizon? How will that play out? What are the costs that have to be paid by the incumbent party?
Well, okay, that's a good question. Well, certainly, as I mentioned, even Prime Minister Ishiba is concerned about this rice issue. And what this boils down to on political issues, we have the upper house elections coming up in July. And so the rice thing just adds to one of the issues regarding his low ratings and popularity. And here, the opposition party has been asking for a reduction in the consumption tax from 8% on food to either 0 or 4%. And the opposition party feels would be, direct impact in a positive way for the consumer and to address the issues of the costs in food. And the Prime Minister has actually kind of opposed that proposal and says that, he's concerned about the fiscal issues of the Japanese government. But having said that, our fiscal deficit is already 260% of GDP. So, I don't know if the reducing the consumption tax or keeping the consumption tax is going to move the needle. But he has to address this proposal by the opposition party. This will be tough because certainly there's a lot of, by the consumer, momentum to have the consumption tax reduced, at least on food, and for a certain period of time.
Yeah, indeed. And, the pressure's on Ishiba ahead of the July upper house elections because, if you take a look at how he's polling, I think he needs all the help he can get. Ernie, listen, I want to focus on you, though, if we could. You're a case study
Sure.
because you're in the food business, right?
Right.
What I want to know is how you've been personally, or your businesses have been dealing with high input costs. Obviously you've been looking for cheaper suppliers. Have you been forced to look at import substitution? And here, with the case of rice, I haven't done the math, right? But with tariffs, I wouldn't be surprised if, American short grain rice, which gets into Japan, even with tariffs, ends up being either competitive with or even cheaper than domestic rice, the way things are going. What do you think?
Well, to your point, actually, there has been a huge increase in import of rice, despite the fact that there are some tariff issues around it and the complexity of importing rice to Japan. It has actually expanded because of this situation we're having. Overall, though, the biggest issue, as I mentioned earlier, is that 60% of all food is imported. So the number I look at that affects my business is really the exchange rates and the yen being so weak. It was only recently we were talking about 116 yen to the dollar, went to 161, and now we're around 143, 144 yen to the dollar. This exchange rate is really the key thing that affects my business and also affects the whole the consumer in terms of their food. So beyond rice, that's the issue. But for rice in specific, yes, imports are coming in because of this.